crazy last couple of months, but somehow I managed to still read nearly 20 books. So let's see how that turned out. Starting off with the Dream Blood duology by N.K. Jemisin. This is a adult fantasy series that basically focuses on the idea of dream magic and the moon goddess and the sun lineage that is kind of ruling one of the cities. There's a lot going on. So in The Killing Moon, we end up following the dream gatherers as they're discovering that a war might take place and they're trying to stop it or figure out how to deal with that. In The Shadowed Sun, this is 10 years later, and this is more of what happened after the fact, and there is more of a romance aspect to this one. I really enjoyed both of them and ended up giving them 5 stars. I do hear that people who are a little bit more into epic fantasies thought that they were a little bit more on the boring side, but for me, they were right up my alley, and I really enjoyed them. Next up, I ended up reading A Psalm of Storms and Silence by Roseanne A. Brown. This is the second in the A Song of Wraiths and Ruins duology, and this kind of just follows the story of the first one. I won't get too much into it. I did enjoy it. I feel like I would have enjoyed it more if I had read the first one right before reading this again, just so that I could have touched up on what happened in the first book. This is a enemies to lovers sort of situation where the two characters are basically destined to attempt to kill each other, and in the process they end up finding out things that they didn't know beforehand. So I did enjoy it, but like I said, probably would have enjoyed it more if I read them closer together. Next up is Sleigh by Britney Morris, and this is a YA contemporary about a young black girl who is at a predominantly white school and has created a black focus massive multiplayer role-playing game, and when someone dies it kind of brings spotlight to this secret project that she had been working on into the public's eyes, and then the question of racism starts popping up and she is confronted with a lot of personal questions about whether or not her game was worth it and whether or not she should come clean that she is the creator of the game to her family, friends, and the world. I think I ended up giving this either a high 4-star or 5 stars. Really enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I would. Next up is This Poison Heart by Kaylin Bayron, and this was the first POC at Book Club pick of this year. It is a YA fantasy where our main character is a black girl who ends up having these magical powers around plants, and she ends up inheriting this house, and she's trying to discover her past and powers and how it's connected to this bigger thing going on. There is some interesting mythology and just interesting connections and a lot of stuff going on. I absolutely loved this and would have loved it more had there not been a love interest with a backstory that I just didn't appreciate them having if they were to be the love interest. Not a fan personally. This one was going to be a 5-star, but it ended up being more of a high 4-star, and I cannot wait until the next book comes out since it did leave us on a bit of a cliffhanger. Next up is a book that I don't have the physical copy of, and that is Escaping Exodus. This and its sequel, Symbiosis, I ended up reading both of them, not quite back to back, but almost. The first one I almost DNF. I loved the premise. It's a YA science fiction about a society that has a matriarchy, and there are some questionable things that they are doing, and some people end up kind of realizing that things may not be as they seem. They end up living in these giant space beasts, and they kind of harvest from them and kind of survive because of them. I thought the premise was really interesting, but I really didn't enjoy reading a lot of it, especially the first book. I did enjoy the second book more, but even that wasn't my favorite. But because the second book went the way it was, it made me like the first book a little bit more. So in the end, I ended up giving the second book a low 4 stars and the first book a 3.5. Next up, we have Queenie by Candace Carty Williams, and this is an adult contemporary about a woman who, during a separation from her partner, is dealing with a lot of stuff, and it's a talk about mental illness. There's a talk about being black in the workplace and relationships and all kinds of things. Our main character is kind of spiraling. She ends up sleeping around a lot, so it is very sexually filled. It was a hard book for multiple reasons, but I did end up enjoying it because I ended up caring for the character Queenie quite a lot, and I found myself very invested in it despite some of the difficult topics that I was bringing up. Then we have If You Come Softly by Jacqueline Woodson, and this is a Romeo and Juliet retelling that's supposed to be a modern take, so it's set in Brooklyn in like the 80s or the 90s. This was written back in the late 90s. Admittedly, when I was first reading it, I was feeling kind of so-so about the romance. I thought it was interesting, but I didn't fully get invested. It was kind of like the start of this romance. It felt a little insta-lovey, which is very Romeo and Juliet, but the kind of commentary and the direction it was going and all of the things that happened, this book made me sob. I listened to the audiobook, so that ended up making some things a little bit more intense for me because I wasn't really paying attention to where I was in the book. It caught me off guard. I ugly cried. There's a video of me doing it. 5 stars. I ended up loving it in the end, but it was emotional. It was very, very emotional. And then the last February book is Blood Like Magic by Leslie Sambury, and this is a YA fantasy about a girl who has just gotten her period, which is a significant point in the witch's life in this world because blood and magic are very tied together, and it means that it's time for you to do your trials to figure out what your magical powers is, and her trials happens to be that she needs to destroy her first ever love, so she kind of goes on a quest to fall in love so that she can destroy them so she can save her family, and it's kind of the process of all of this happening and us uncovering more and kind of why this is happening and learning about the system and all of that, and I loved it, and I'm really excited to continue the series and see if I enjoy it more. Next up, we have the March's Picks. I started off reading library books that I need to return pretty soon, so I ended up reading Gods of Jade and Shadow first by Sylvia Moreno Garcia because I knew I had liked the previous book that I read from her so much, and I really wanted to give this one a try, and I'm so happy that I did because I loved it. So we basically have this girl who is in somewhere in Mexico, and she's kind of in a very unfortunate situation where she has to take care of the family and she's not treated the best. She's kind of an outsider in the family, and she ends up uncovering something that kind of leads her to one of the gods of death, and she ends up on this big adventure, and it was just so much fun. I know a lot of it has to be with, I love stories that play with the idea of death as a character and the like nuances and the differences and the changes for that in kind of an interesting way, and I feel like this did that. It was a lot of fun. 5 stars for me. I also ended up picking the Once and Future Witches by Alex E. Haro. This is another library book, and I loved it. I loved it. It's a book about 3 sisters who are witches who were separated and end up coming back together. It's in the past when suffragettes are a thing where women are trying to get the vote, and magic and witches, there's all of these connections, and obviously things are banned and they're trying to get together and make a difference, and it has a lot of great commentary. There are some characters that I really enjoy, and just overall it was a ton of fun. I wasn't expecting to enjoy it nearly as much as I did. I definitely at some point am hoping that I can get my own copies of these 2 books because I love them so much and would love to have them on my shelf. Although if I can get a different cover for this one because it's not my favorite cover, unfortunately, but we'll see. I am holding off on buying new books because I plan to move someday in the future, and I realize that I have way too many books right now, so I'm focusing on getting through my books so I can get rid of some of the ones that I'm not interested in, and then I can start the collection up in the future when I find my forever home. Next up, I'm not sure if I read this before or after the next one, but I don't have the physical book. I had to return it early, and that is Real Life. Now, unfortunately, I did not like this book. I ended up reading the whole thing, but I probably should have DNF'd it. It was a contemporary about a young gay black man who is in a predominantly white field, specifically in science lab work. So he's kind of working at, I think, a school to do a bunch of like tests and stuff, and it's kind of him dealing with the racism that he has among his friends without people like meaning to, that kind of stuff, and then also him dealing with sexism. He had to deal with some women who kind of accused him of things that were not true because they were somehow jealous of him, even though he was kind of the bottom of the barrel. I didn't enjoy it. I appreciate what the author was doing, but it was just kind of a downer. I didn't know what the point was. There wasn't a goal, so I was just kind of suffering through all of it without knowing what I wanted to deal with. There's definitely trigger warnings for this book, I think it's a good book in general. It just definitely wasn't for me, and I didn't enjoy it, unfortunately. Next up, I have Gideon the Ninth. I was so excited to read this book because I do know it's a couple of people's favorites. So this is by Tamsin Muir, and it is I want to say it's sapphic, but I don't necessarily feel like the lesbian aspect of it is super strong. Like, it's there, but it's not like there's not like a romance really, but it's kind of this epic fantasy of a bunch of families or houses that are all trying to get to lichdom, and they are all necromancers, and they have their little like fighting companions, and Gideon happens to be the fighting companion for the ninth house, and she's trying to escape, and she's uncovering all of this stuff and learning about her necromancer and the necromancers that are there and what's going on and her own past, and I friggin' loved it. I loved it. Like, I thought I would like it, and when I started, I was all like, I don't know, and then we kind of got further into it, and I adored it. I adored it. I adored it so much. I am so hyped to continue the series, but this on its own, I loved it a lot, and I do want to experience more. Now, back to my own books. I ended up reading Razorblade Tears by S.A. Cosby because Books and Lala, the Literally Dead book club, had a live show for it, so like the day before I was all like, I want to be a part of that, so I read the book really quick. It was what I expected. I actually really enjoyed this book. So this is a story of two fathers who do not accept their gay sons who happen to be married and are murdered at the beginning of the book, and it's the two fathers trying to avenge their sons' murders, and they are learning about their own issues, what they have lost because of the fact that they didn't accept their sons as they were, and trying to uncover what happened to them and why they were murdered in this kind of hate crime scenario, and kind of stand up for their children when they hadn't previously, like when it's too late, but it's them trying to make up for that. It is definitely one of those epic action adventure movie type books. I know when I watched the live show, several people actually didn't like this, and everybody who ended up saying negative things, I 100% agree with their negative criticisms of the book, but because I knew, I guess, what I was getting into, I enjoyed it. I thought it was great. There is homophobia in here, but there's a good commentary on it. It's not glorifying in any way. There are some things that are ridiculous, some things that are over the top, some things that are kind of stupid, but I enjoyed it. I did. I enjoyed it quite a bit. I think I gave it like a high 4 stars. Okay, next up I have A Map of the Dark by Karen Ellis, and I actually picked this for the Magical Readathon so that I could get the night something option for my character. I have more about that in the reading vlog. Anyway, I don't think this book is terrible, but I ended up giving it 2 stars. So this is a crime book. We have a detective who is trying to figure out what happened to a girl who went missing. All of it's fine. In general, there's no problem, so I kind of feel bad giving it a 2 stars, but I did not care. I didn't care in the slightest. There is nothing about this book that was interesting to me, that was gripping. I fell asleep a couple of times while reading this, and yes, that doesn't mean I missed some stuff, and some of it may have been useful, but I didn't care. Like, I didn't care, and I'm a completionist. I didn't care that I missed parts of this because I cared so little about it. I feel bad because I'm sure it's fine. I'm sure some people would like it. I like detective and crime books. This was not it for me. Or maybe, what if I don't? What if I used to and I don't now? Maybe I like detective crime books that are around like romance or something. I don't know, but this wasn't it. Then we have The Giver. Got a ton of comments of everybody saying how much they loved this book, so I was really excited about it. And then I started reading it and I was all like, dude, this is fan-friggin-tastic. I was into it. So this is a society where they have strips people's uniqueness. They choose their jobs for you. There's a limit on how many kids you can have. There's all of these rules to kind of make it so that the society doesn't have to deal with all of the problems that the world has. So it's kind of this utopia situation, and we have one character who is tasked to get the memories of the society so everybody else doesn't have to deal with it, and it brings up a lot of questions, and I was so into it. And then the ending happened, and I was like, what? Like, that's it? I was so mad. I was so mad. It didn't give me anything. The ending sucked. But the book was great. I feel like this is a great conversational book. It's one that a lot of people read for school, so I totally get that. I totally get that. I also found out that this is the first in a quartet, so this is part of a series. So I am interested in reading more of the series. Lois Lowry did an excellent job with the idea of this. I'm just livid by the ending. It was so nothing. Yeah, and it's funny because I listened to the audiobook and I was all like, what? And so I went and I read the last chapter again and was still like, no, I don't like this. So probably a good 4 stars for me. I haven't rated any of these in Call-Pile yet, so all of the ratings that I've given you for the March and even some of the February books could be total BS. Next up, we have Rainbow Royale's Carry On. And so this is the book that she ended up writing, I think after Fangirl, because in Fangirl, our main character was writing this fan fiction called Carry On with these 2 characters, which is loosely inspired, I think, by Harry Potter. And it's a male-on-male fanfic story. Now, in this case, it's a fantasy. You've got mythical creatures, you've got the school, you've got these 2 enemies. It's an enemies to lovers. And you've got a bunch of like mysteries. They're like a big bad. They don't know exactly what's going on. There's a chosen one. There's, you know, like magic, families that are in like a dispute. Like there's all kinds of stuff going on. Now, when I first started reading this, I was like, okay, like what's going on? It took a couple of chapters until what I wanted happened. And then once we started getting more of the 2 main characters, I started getting really invested in it. Overall, the story was interesting. A lot of random things that were happening was interesting. And I ended up really enjoying it. I didn't love the ending. I felt like the ending was rushed. I liked it. I had no problem with the ending except that it was rushed. But other than that, I loved it. High 4-star, low 5-star, I'm assuming. And the last book that I've read so far, I ended up starting Rosewater by Tade Thompson. This is the first in a trilogy. It's a sci-fi fantasy and I have not been enjoying it. I don't care. I don't care about anything that's happening. It's super confusing. I don't care about trying to figure out what's going on. I don't fully know how to describe this. Basically, we're in like Lagos and there's aliens. Rosewater popped up after the aliens made contact with us and they ended up, I guess, giving us some sort of like spores or something, which has infected some people and has made it so that they have these kind of sensitive things where they can like read people's minds and connect in weird ways. They have like these walkers, and then there's all of this kind of war stuff and fighting stuff, and it goes back into different times. And I don't know, I just like, I wasn't into it, which was really sad because I'm a fan of the other Tade Thompson works that I have read, so I was just really excited for this. I think other people might enjoy it. Maybe I'm not like an epic sci-fi or epic fantasy kind of gal. Like when there's just so much to follow, it starts becoming boring to me, but that's not true because I did enjoy reading Game of Thrones, so I don't know. And that's it. That is all of my reading for the past 2 months. I struggled. I was on the struggle bus, especially in February. So much going on, but I still managed to read quite a lot. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the reading wrap up, got some good ideas for things that you might be interested in picking up yourself. If you've read any of these, let me know in the comment section down below what you thought, if you agree or disagree with some of my opinions. If you want to see more booktube content, you can check out some videos here or some of my reading vlogs here. And if you made it this far, be sure to include this emoji down below, and I will catch you in the next video. Until then, bye!